It's on my terms. It's my country. I know how this will pan out. If you don't pay, you're going to jail. These are words that are ringing in the heads of two young Southeast University students, economics students, and that is James and Stanley. James is 21 years old and he's from Croydon, and Stanley is from Bromley, and 20-year-old. Now, these two economics students went to Dubai to celebrate their joint birthday, actually. They rented a car from the airport and drove off to enjoy their break. They intended to stay in Dubai for just 4 or 5 days. Unfortunately, they had a small accident with the car and a sign went under the wheel, which caused some wheel damage. Now, when returning to the rental car agency, they were requested to pay a substantial amount of money, and then that amount increased and increased and increased, and they were told that they weren't going to be given back their passport, which had accidentally been retained by the rental car agency, until they paid these amounts, which came to a total of £12,000, which was well above the agreed excess amount, which they paid immediately, of 25,000 dirhams. So in total, they paid around about 65,000 dirhams to this rental agency, but they were consistently told that they would have to pay more, and they would never get their passport back. Anyway, the boys turned up at the rental agency expecting they'd finally met the demands, and they expected that their passport would be returned. However, they were met with more demands, this time for 150,000 dirhams. So £30,000 was expected to be paid just at the click of fingers with, even though they'd agreed to an excess, they'd paid the excess, but they were told they wouldn't be able to leave the country and they would go to jail if they didn't pay this amount. The agency had left the passport on the counter, and one of the boys, James, reached for it and proceeded to exit the building. And 3 of the workers in the agency came behind him and grabbed him in a neck hold, essentially, and the other one grabbed the arm of Stanley. Now, neither one of these boys really did anything. Their hands weren't raised, nothing, but managed to struggle free and continue to exit the building. It was at this point that the agency reported them to the police for assault, and essentially that was just a tactic to try and extort further funds out of them. So at this point, they a police case was opened against them and they were not able to leave the country. So they've been there since August 31st on these trumped up charges that CCTV proves are not true. The CCTV in the office shows that they hadn't committed any assault. But in the UAE, the process is slow, the police seemingly don't care, and these young boys have been kept in the country, staying in hotels for the past couple of months. Their families have been extremely distressed, and Stanley spoke to me and told me about how his mother had been calling him, crying on a regular basis. Their families, both of their mothers actually are care workers and nurses, I believe, community nurse. So they're really not on high wages, but the rental car agency had kept asking them, are you footballers? They assumed they were part of a football team and were hoping that they'd be quite wealthy. And perhaps with the economic pressures under the coronavirus situation, they were even more aggressive with their extortion methods. And they were hoping that these boys would simply come up with this money and that would compensate them for I suppose, a downturn in tourism. So anyway, they're still stuck there. There's nothing they can do. They can't pay the £30,000. Their parents are not rich and they're students themselves. So what we have is a situation where Emiratis are continuing, or the UAE is continuing to allow this kind of situation. And it is common. This is not the first one we've dealt with. We're talking fabricated allegations of abuse, of swearing, of the middle finger, offensive behaviour, and in this rental car situation, which is not unusual. So these cases are opened with the police for the sheer purpose of extorting a settlement out of the victims, and most people in that situation are going to pay. I mean, when you're there on a holiday, 3 or 4 days, and you're suddenly faced with not being able to return to your home country and you're being threatened, you're going to, if possible, part with your money just for your freedom, and you don't know whether you're going to face years in prison. The boys hired a lawyer, and the lawyer said himself that they could face 1 to 1.5 years in prison if they don't pay the money. So we have a situation where that's really not an advertisement for the UAE as a destination for tourism, while tourists are being preyed upon by locals who understand the system, are willing to manipulate it and participate in what is legal abuse and essentially the corruption of the police force if they're not willing to protect tourists. We've raised this case to the media, and we've contacted Sheikh Mohammed, who we hope will intervene in this case that is really sending a terrible message for the UAE. Now, if people are willing to travel in coronavirus and pump money into the economy and they're met with this kind of treatment, it's really not going to help them in the future, is it? So Stanley and James, their families are in great distress. We're hoping that the rental car agency will withdraw the charges. The boys have already paid well and above what they should have paid, and they've suffered for the past 2 months. They're staying in hotels now, funded by their parents. One, with one being a community nurse and the father working for as a platform train operator. So we don't have people on high wages. They're not famous footballers, and they're being extorted and abused, and these are young boys. Stanley has said that he would never go back to Dubai after this. It's just been extremely stressful. No one would expect it. His studies have suffered, but most importantly, his family has been abused throughout this period. They've lost a lot of money to this scam. And this is a scam that we've been seeing for the past 12 years. It's a scam that, has gone to the media before. It's an ongoing issue that the UAE government is doing nothing really to stop. And while this kind of fake exploitative allegations exist and continue to thrive and to benefit people, obviously the country is not fit for tourism. And I think that this kind of common scam needs to go into the FCO's travel warnings and tourist warnings for the country. Not just the UK, but obviously all of the other countries need to install this in their travel warnings. So let's see if we can get Stanley and James home. Let's hope that either the rental car agency drop the charges, or that Sheikh Mohammed, or at a higher diplomatic level, that they can intervene in what is clearly an injustice. We're also contacting the MPs of Stanley and James, and we hope that they can contact the FCO and put some pressure on them to then speak with their counterparts in the UAE on a diplomatic level and get these boys home.